The morning sun had barely crested the Sierra Nevada when Penelope Owens discovered her brother slouched against the stable door, reeking of whiskey and shame, with the devastating news that their last horse was gone. "Tommy! Where is Dancer?" Penelope demanded, her voice sharp as a whip crack in the cool Nevada air. She had risen before dawn to prepare for the journey to Carson City, where she planned to sell her preserves at the Saturday market. The income from those sales kept food on their table and a roof over their heads, however modest that roof might be. Her younger brother, barely 20 years old to her 23, could not meet her eyes. His sandy hair was disheveled, his shirt stained with spilled liquor, and his hands trembled as he tried to form words that would not come. The silence stretched between them like a canyon, deep and impossible to cross. "Tommy," Penelope repeated, her stomach beginning to twist with dread. "Where is our horse?" "I lost him," Tommy finally whispered, his voice cracking. "At the Silver Dollar last night. There was a card game, and I thought I could win enough to fix the roof before winter comes. I thought I was being smart, Penny. I thought I could double our money, and we would be set for months." The words hit Penelope like physical blows. Dancer had been their father's horse, one of the last connections they had to the man who had died 3 years ago in a mining accident. More than sentiment, though, the horse was their lifeline. Without him, Penelope could not make the 10-mile journey to Carson City. Without those sales, they would not survive the approaching autumn, let alone the harsh Nevada winter that would follow. "You gambled away Dancer?" Penelope could barely form the words. Her hands had gone numb, and she felt the world tilting beneath her feet. "Our only horse? The only way we have to make a living?" Tommy's face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I am sorry. God, Penny, I am so sorry. I was winning at first, and then the cards turned, and I thought if I just played one more hand, I could win it all back. But this cowboy, he just kept winning, and before I knew it, I had put up Dancer as collateral, and Penelope turned away from her brother, unable to look at his face any longer. Rage and despair warred within her chest, each emotion so powerful she thought they might tear her apart. Their mother had died giving birth to Tommy, and their father had made Penelope promise to look after her little brother. She had kept that promise through their father's death, through 2 hard years of drought, through Tommy's struggles with drink, and his inability to hold down steady work. But this was too much. "Who won him?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Quincy Lancaster," Tommy said. "He is a horse breeder from up north, passing through town with a string of horses to sell in Sacramento. Penny, I tried to talk to him this morning, tried to explain, but he said a gambling debt is a gambling debt." Penelope stood very still, watching the sun paint gold across the scrub brush and rocky soil that stretched toward the distant mountains. The late September air already carried a hint of the cold to come. Without Dancer, she had no way to transport her goods, no way to earn money, no way to prepare for winter. They would lose the small cabin her father had built with his own hands. They would have nothing. "I am going to talk to this Quincy Lancaster," she said finally. "Where is he?" "He is camped on the north edge of town near the creek. But Penny, I already tried." "You are not me," Penelope interrupted. She went into the cabin, ignoring the ramshackle state of the roof that had prompted Tommy's disastrous decision. She changed into her best dress, a simple blue calico that her mother had sewn before she died. It was worn thin in places, but it was clean and mended. She pinned her dark brown hair into a neat bun, splashed water on her face, and tried to calm the furious beating of her heart. When she emerged, Tommy was sitting on the ground, his head in his hands. Penelope walked past him without a word, her jaw set with determination. The walk to the north edge of Carson City took 20 minutes, and with each step, she rehearsed what she would say. She would appeal to this Quincy Lancaster's sense of fairness. She would offer to work for him to earn back her horse. She would do whatever it took, because without Dancer, she and Tommy were finished. The camp was easy to spot. A dozen horses grazed in a makeshift corral, their coats gleaming in the morning light. They were fine animals, clearly well bred and well cared for. A wagon stood nearby, and a small fire burned low, coffee pot hanging over the flames. And there, checking the legs of a striking bay mare, was a man who could only be Quincy Lancaster. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who spent his life working with horses. His dark hair was a bit too long, curling slightly at his collar, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. He wore dusty trousers, scuffed boots, and a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms. As Penelope approached, he looked up, and she found herself meeting eyes of a remarkable clear blue, like a mountain lake in summer. "Mr. Lancaster?" she called out, stopping a respectful distance from his camp. He straightened, studying her with an expression she could not quite read. "That is me, and you must be Tommy Owens's sister." "Penelope Owens," she said, lifting her chin. "I have come to talk to you about my horse." Something flickered across Quincy Lancaster's face, too quick for Penelope to identify. He set down the mare's hoof gently and walked toward her, moving with an easy grace that reminded her of the horses he bred. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the result of years squinting into the sun. He was older than her, perhaps 28 or 29, but there was something ageless about him, too. "I figured you might," he said. His voice was deep and quiet, with a slight drawl that suggested he came from somewhere south. "Your brother came by at dawn, begging me to give the horse back." "Dancer is not just a horse," Penelope said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "He is our livelihood. Without him, I cannot transport my goods to sell in town. Without that income, my brother and I will lose everything." Quincy Lancaster was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "I understand that, Miss Owens, but your brother gambled that horse away fair and square. There were 6 other men at that table who witnessed it. If I gave Dancer back just because you asked, my reputation would be ruined. A man's word is everything out here." "My brother made a terrible mistake," Penelope said, her hands clenching at her sides. "He has been struggling since our father died. He turns to drink when he should not, and he makes poor decisions, but he is not a bad person. Please, Mr. Lancaster, I am begging you. Name your price. I will work for you, clean for you, cook for you, whatever it takes. Just please return our horse." She hated the desperation in her voice, hated that she had been reduced to begging, but pride was a luxury she could not afford. Quincy Lancaster's expression softened slightly, and he let out a long breath. "Miss Owens, I cannot just give you the horse back, but I will tell you what. I have been looking for someone to help me with this string of horses on the journey to Sacramento. It is a 2-week journey there and 2 weeks back. If you are willing to work for me for those 4 weeks, I will pay you enough to buy a decent horse when we return, and I will let you borrow one of my mares to get your goods to market before we leave." Penelope stared at him, her mind racing. 4 weeks away from home, traveling alone with a strange man across the rough country between Nevada and California. It was not proper. People would talk. But what choice did she have? "I would need to bring my goods to market tomorrow," she said slowly. "The Saturday market is our best chance for sales." "That can be arranged," Quincy said. "And Miss Owens, I should tell you straight out that I run a respectable operation. I would expect you to help with the horses, with making camp, with cooking, but nothing more. You would have your own bedroll, your own space. I give you my word on that." There was something in his steady gaze that made Penelope believe him. She had become a good judge of character out of necessity, and while Quincy Lancaster was clearly a man who drove hard bargains, she did not sense any cruelty or dishonesty in him. "All right," she said. "I will do it, but I need to see Dancer first. I need to know he is being treated well." A slight smile tugged at the corner of Quincy's mouth, the first hint of warmth she had seen from him. "He is over there, the gray gelding with the white blaze. Go say hello." Penelope hurried to the corral, and her heart clenched when she saw Dancer standing among the other horses. He lifted his head when he saw her, nickering in recognition. She slipped between the rails and went to him, wrapping her arms around his neck and breathing in his familiar scent. "I am so sorry," she whispered into his mane. "I will get you back, I promise." Dancer nuzzled her shoulder, and Penelope felt tears burning behind her eyes. She allowed herself one moment of grief and anger, and then she straightened her spine and turned back to Quincy Lancaster, who had been watching from a polite distance. "Which mare can I borrow for tomorrow?" she asked. Quincy gestured to a pretty chestnut with a white star on her forehead. "That is Rosie. She is gentle and steady, good for pulling a cart. I will bring her by your place this evening along with a wagon you can use." "Thank you," Penelope said stiffly. "What time should I be ready on Monday?" "Dawn," Quincy replied. "We have got a long road ahead of us." Penelope nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Miss Owens? For what it is worth, I am sorry about your brother's poor judgment, but I think you are going to do just fine." She did not trust herself to respond, so she simply walked away, her mind already racing with everything she needed to do. She had to prepare her preserves, talk to Tommy about managing the cabin while she was gone, and pack for a month-long journey with a stranger. When she arrived back at the cabin, Tommy was right where she had left him, looking like a kicked dog. Penelope sat down beside him, suddenly exhausted. "I made a deal with him," she said quietly. "I am going to work for Mr. Lancaster for a month, helping him drive his horses to Sacramento and back. He is lending me a mare and wagon for the market tomorrow, and when I return, he will pay me enough to buy a new horse." Tommy's head shot up, his eyes wide. "Penny, no, you cannot travel alone with a strange man for a month. It is not safe, it is not proper. I will not allow it." "You do not have the right to allow or disallow anything," Penelope said, her voice hardening. "You gambled away that right along with our horse. This is the only option we have, Tommy. The only one." Her brother looked stricken, but he could not argue with her logic. "I will come with you then. I will work for him too." "No," Penelope said firmly. "Someone needs to stay here and watch the cabin. And frankly, Tommy, I do not trust you not to make things worse. You are going to stay here, and you are going to stay away from the saloons, and you are going to keep your head down until I get back. Do you understand?" Tommy nodded miserably, and Penelope felt a pang of guilt beneath her anger. He was her baby brother, and despite everything, she loved him. But love was not enough anymore. He had to learn that actions had consequences. That evening, Quincy Lancaster arrived as promised, leading the chestnut mare Rosie and driving a sturdy wagon. Tommy stayed inside the cabin, too ashamed to show his face, so Penelope met Quincy alone. "This is very kind of you," she said, running her hand along Rosie's neck. The mare was even prettier up close, with intelligent dark eyes and a calm demeanor. "Just business, Miss Owens," Quincy said, but his tone was not unkind. "I will be by at dawn on Monday. Bring warm clothes and a bedroll. The nights get cold in the mountains." "I will be ready," Penelope promised. Quincy tipped his hat to her and walked back toward town, and Penelope watched him go, wondering what she had gotten herself into. The next day, Penelope loaded the wagon with jars of preserves, pickled vegetables, and the quilts she had sewn during the long winter evenings. Rosie pulled the wagon easily, responding to Penelope's commands with a willingness that made the journey to the Saturday market smooth and uneventful. The market was held in the main square of Carson City, and Penelope set up her small table in her usual spot. The day was busy, and Penelope was grateful for the distraction. Customers came and went, admiring her neat stitching and tasting her preserves. She sold nearly everything, earning enough money to buy supplies for her journey and leave some for Tommy to manage on while she was gone. As she packed up in the late afternoon, a shadow fell across her table. "Looks like you did well today." Penelope looked up to find Quincy Lancaster standing there, his hat in his hands. She had not expected to see him until Monday. I did, she said, carefully counting the coins into her purse. Rosie was wonderful. Thank you again for lending her to me. I was heading to the general store and thought I would check on you, Quincy said. He seemed almost awkward, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Make sure you had what you needed for the journey. I have a list, Penelope said, pulling a folded paper from her pocket. Flour, coffee, salt, dried beans. I figure I can supplement with whatever we hunt or forage along the way. Quincy took the list and scanned it, nodding approval. This is good. Smart. Have you done much traveling? Some, Penelope said. My father used to take me with him when he went to the mining camps to sell supplies. That was before he started working in the mines himself. How long ago did you lose him? Quincy asked gently. 3 years, Penelope said. The pain had dulled with time, but it still ached like an old wound in cold weather. Cave in at the lucky strike, they never recovered his body. Quincy's expression turned somber. I am sorry. That is a hard way to lose someone. They stood in silence for a moment, and Penelope found herself studying him more closely. In the afternoon light, she could see faint scars on his hands, the permanent marks of working with horses. There was a wariness about him, a guardedness that suggested he had his own sorrows. What about you? She asked impulsively. Do you have family, Mr. Lancaster? Quincy, he corrected. If we are going to be traveling together for a month, you might as well call me Quincy. And no family to speak of. My parents died when I was young. I have been on my own since I was 15. That must have been difficult, Penelope said softly. Quincy shrugged, but she could see the old pain in his eyes. It taught me to rely on myself, and it led me to horses. They have been better family to me than most people. There was a story there, Penelope sensed, but she did not press. Instead, she finished packing up her goods and climbed onto the wagon seat. Quincy stepped back, settling his hat back on his head. I will see you Monday morning, Penelope, he said, and she noticed he had used her first name without asking permission. Somehow, she did not mind. Monday morning, she agreed, and clicked her tongue to set Rosie moving. Sunday passed in a flurry of preparation. Penelope baked bread, packed her clothes, and gave Tommy strict instructions about caring for the cabin and staying out of trouble. Her brother promised earnestly that he would do better, that he would prove himself while she was gone. Penelope wanted to believe him, but trust was not something that could be rebuilt with words alone. Monday morning arrived cool and clear, with a hint of frost on the ground. Penelope dressed in her most practical clothes, a split riding skirt, a warm shirt, and sturdy boots. She braided her hair into a single plait down her back and covered it with a wide-brimmed hat that had belonged to her father. When she stepped outside with her bedroll and pack, Quincy was already there, sitting on his horse and leading a string of a dozen others. Right on time, he said approvingly. That is a good quality in a traveling companion. I keep my commitments, Quincy, Penelope said, swinging her pack onto Rosie's saddle. She had returned the wagon the night before and would be riding the mare for the journey. Quincy's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, and she realized he was pleased that she had used his first name. Let us ride then. We have got a lot of ground to cover. They left Carson City as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the rocky landscape. The string of horses followed docilely, well-trained and responsive to Quincy's commands. Penelope rode beside him, matching his steady pace. For the first few hours they barely spoke, each lost in their own thoughts. The terrain gradually changed as they traveled west, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and sage. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch of bread and dried meat. Quincy was efficient in everything he did, checking each horse's hooves and legs, making sure they were all drinking enough water. You really care about them, Penelope observed, watching him work. They are my livelihood, Quincy said. But yes, I care about them. A man who does not care about his animals is not much of a man in my book. My father used to say the same thing, Penelope said. He said you could judge a person's character by how they treated creatures that could not fight back. Quincy looked at her with new interest. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was, Penelope said. I wish he were still here. He would have kept Tommy on a straighter path. Your brother is a grown man, Quincy said, not unkindly. At some point, he has to be responsible for his own choices. I know that, Penelope said, but the words still stung because they were true. It is just hard to let go of the promise I made to my father, to look after Tommy. Looking after someone does not mean protecting them from every consequence of their actions, Quincy said. He straightened from examining a paint mare's hoof and met her eyes. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is let them fall and learn to get back up on their own. Penelope was quiet, absorbing his words. They made sense, but they also scared her. If she stopped trying to fix Tommy's mistakes, what would happen to him? They traveled until dusk and made camp near a small creek where the horses could drink and graze. Quincy showed Penelope how he liked to set up camp, where to position the horses, how to build a fire that would last through the night. She was a quick learner, and he seemed pleased with her efforts. After a simple dinner of beans and bacon, they sat on opposite sides of the fire, the darkness pressing close around them. The stars overhead were brilliant, undimmed by town lights, and a half-moon hung low on the horizon. Tell me about your horse breeding, Penelope said, breaking the comfortable silence. How did you get started? Quincy poked at the fire with a stick, sending up a shower of sparks. When I struck out on my own at 15, I got work at a ranch in Texas. The foreman there, old man named Walt, took me under his wing. He taught me everything about horses, how to breed for temperament and strength, how to train them right. When he died, he left me 3 mares and a stallion. That was 10 years ago. I have been building my business ever since. You must be very good at it, Penelope said. Those horses you have are beautiful. Thank you, Quincy said, and she could hear the pride in his voice. Each one is special to me. I know their bloodlines, their personalities, what they are best suited for. When I sell them, I make sure they are going to good homes. Is that why you would not give Dancer back? Penelope asked, unable to help herself. Because you think I could not give him a good home? Quincy looked at her sharply. No, I kept Dancer because a debt is a debt. But Penelope, I have been thinking. That gray gelding of yours, he has good bone structure, a calm temperament. I could use a horse like that in my breeding program, so here is what I propose. At the end of this month, when I pay you for your work, I will give you enough to buy 2 good horses instead of 1. That way you will have a spare in case anything happens. And I will keep Dancer. Penelope's first instinct was to refuse, to argue, to fight for the horse that had been her father's. But then logic took over. Dancer was 12 years old, aging for a working horse. 2 younger horses would serve her better in the long run, and Quincy was offering her a fair deal, more than fair. All right, she said slowly, but I want to stay in touch with you. I want to know how Dancer is doing. A smile spread across Quincy's face, transforming his serious features into something warmer and more approachable. I can do that. I pass through Carson City a few times a year. I will make sure to stop by and give you updates. Thank you, Penelope said, and found that she meant it. The anger she had carried since discovering Tommy's betrayal was beginning to ease, replaced by a cautious optimism. Maybe this journey would turn out to be a blessing in disguise. The days fell into a rhythm. They rose before dawn, broke camp, and traveled until mid-afternoon, when they would stop to rest the horses during the hottest part of the day. Then they would travel a few more hours before making camp for the night. Quincy taught Penelope the finer points of horse care, showing her how to spot signs of lameness, how to treat minor injuries, how to gentle a nervous animal. She proved to be a natural, with a soft touch and an intuitive understanding of horse behavior. They talked as they rode, sharing stories of their pasts. Quincy told her about the ranches he had worked on, the horses he had trained, the hard lessons he had learned about trust and betrayal. Penelope spoke of her childhood, of her mother's death, and her father's determination to give his children a good life despite his grief. The more they talked, the more comfortable they became with each other, until the silences between them felt as natural as the conversations. On the fifth day, as they climbed into the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, trouble found them. They had stopped for the midday rest when Penelope noticed one of the horses, a young black stallion named Midnight, acting strangely. He was limping, favoring his left front leg, and when Quincy examined him, he found a deep cut on the fetlock. "How did that happen?" Penelope asked, worried. "Could have been a sharp rock, or maybe he got kicked by one of the other horses," Quincy said grimly. "Either way, it needs to be cleaned and bandaged, and he cannot carry any weight for a few days." They spent the rest of the afternoon, camped in a grove of pines, tending to Midnight's injury. Penelope watched as Quincy cleaned the wound with careful, gentle hands, murmuring soothing words to the nervous stallion. His patience was infinite, and gradually Midnight calmed, allowing the treatment without fuss. "You have a gift," Penelope said softly. Quincy glanced at her, his hands never pausing in their work. "It is not a gift. It is just understanding that fear makes everything worse. If you can stay calm, the animal will stay calm too." "I think it is more than that," Penelope insisted. "I have seen plenty of men handle horses. Most of them use force and intimidation. You use respect." Quincy finished bandaging the wound and straightened, his eyes meeting hers. There was something in his gaze that made Penelope's breath catch, a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "My father used to beat the horses when they did not obey," Quincy said quietly. "I hated it. I swore that when I had my own animals, I would never treat them that way. Every living thing deserves to be treated with kindness." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Penelope found herself stepping closer, drawn by an impulse she did not fully understand. "That is a good philosophy," she said softly. "It applies to people too," Quincy said, his voice dropping lower. "Everyone carries wounds, Penelope. Some you can see, some you cannot. But a little kindness can make all the difference." She knew he was talking about more than just horses now. He was talking about her, about Tommy, about the hard knocks life had dealt them both. And standing there in the dappled shade of the pine trees, with the smell of the forest around them and the warmth of his gaze on her face, Penelope felt something shift in her chest. This was not just a business arrangement anymore. This was something else, something deeper and more frightening. "We should probably keep moving," she said, suddenly flustered. "Once Midnight is settled." Quincy nodded, a knowing smile playing at his lips. "Yes, we should." But as they prepared to break camp, Penelope caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. She busied herself with checking Rosie's tack, trying to ignore the flutter of emotions in her stomach. This was not part of the plan. She could not afford to develop feelings for Quincy Lancaster. In 3 more weeks, she would return to Carson City, and he would continue on his way. That was how it had to be. Yet as the days passed, Penelope found it harder and harder to maintain that emotional distance. Quincy was unlike any man she had ever known. He was strong but gentle, confident but not arrogant, and he treated her as an equal rather than a fragile thing to be protected. He asked her opinions and listened to her answers. He laughed at her jokes and shared his own dry humor, and when she woke in the middle of the night, frightened by strange sounds in the darkness, she would see him sitting by the fire, keeping watch, and feel safe. They crossed into California on the 8th day, following a rough trail through the mountains. The scenery was breathtaking, all towering pines and granite cliffs, with glimpses of distant valleys below. They stopped to rest at a high meadow, where wildflowers still bloomed despite the lateness of the season. "It is beautiful here," Penelope said, standing at the edge of the meadow and looking out over the view. Quincy came to stand beside her, so close their shoulders almost touched. It is, he agreed. I never get tired of this country. It is hard and unforgiving, but it is honest. It does not pretend to be anything other than what it is. Is that why you keep traveling? Penelope asked. Because you like the honesty? Partly, Quincy said, but mostly I travel because I have not found a reason to stop. The words carried a weight of loneliness that made Penelope's heart ache. She turned to look at him and found him already watching her, his blue eyes intense. What would it take, she asked softly, to make you want to stop? Quincy was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her face. I am starting to get an idea, he finally said, his voice rough. Penelope's breath caught. The air between them felt charged, electric, and she knew that if she leaned in just a little, he would kiss her. Part of her wanted that desperately. But another part, the cautious part that had learned not to trust too easily, held her back. We should get moving, she said, breaking the moment. We still have a lot of miles to cover. Quincy nodded, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face before he schooled his features back to neutrality. Yes, you are right. But something had changed between them, and they both knew it. The tension that had been building for days was now impossible to ignore. That night, as they made camp by a rushing stream, their movements around each other were careful, almost choreographed, as if they were both afraid of accidental touches that might break their resolve. After dinner, Penelope went to the stream to wash her plate and cup. The water was ice cold, fed by snowmelt from higher elevations, and she gasped as it numbed her fingers. She was so focused on her task that she did not hear Quincy approach until he spoke. Here, let me help you with that. Penelope nearly dropped the cup in surprise. Quincy crouched beside her, taking the plate from her hands and rinsing it in the stream. His hands were steady, competent, and Penelope found herself staring at them, remembering how gentle they had been with Midnight's injury. Thank you, she said, her voice coming out breathier than she intended. Penelope, Quincy said, setting the clean plate aside and turning to face her fully. I need to tell you something. Her heart began to pound. What is it? This past week and a half, traveling with you, it has been the best time I have had in years, Quincy said. The words seemed to cost him effort, as if he was not used to speaking his feelings aloud. You are smart and capable and kind, and I find myself thinking about you even when I should be focused on the horses. I know this is not what either of us signed up for, and I know it is complicated, but I needed you to know. Penelope sat back on her heels, her mind racing. Everything she felt, he felt too. The attraction, the connection, the growing sense that they fit together in a way that made no logical sense, given how short a time they had known each other. I think about you too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But Quincy, what does this mean? In 2 weeks, maybe less, we will reach Sacramento. You will sell your horses, and we will head back to Carson City, and then you will move on to wherever you go next. How can anything real develop when we are living on borrowed time? Quincy reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. The touch sent a shiver up Penelope's arm that had nothing to do with the cold. Maybe we do not have to live on borrowed time, he said. Maybe there is another way. What do you mean? Penelope asked. Come with me, Quincy said simply. Not just to Sacramento and back, but really come with me. We could be partners, you and I. You have a gift with horses, Penelope. I have seen it this past week. We could build something together, something that is ours. The offer was so unexpected, so enormous, that Penelope could not immediately process it. Leave Carson City permanently? Leave behind the cabin her father had built, the life she had carved out for herself, the responsibility of looking after Tommy? I cannot just abandon my brother, she said, pulling her hand away. Tommy needs me. Does he? Quincy asked gently. Or have you convinced yourself he needs you because it gives you a purpose? Penelope, your brother is 20 years old. He is old enough to take responsibility for his own life, and maybe he will not do that as long as you are there to fix his mistakes. The words stung because they echoed what Quincy had said before, and because, deep down, Penelope knew they were true. She had been enabling Tommy, rescuing him from the consequences of his actions, and it had not helped him become a better man. If anything, it had made things worse. I need to think about this, she said, standing up abruptly. It is too much, too fast. I understand, Quincy said, rising to his feet as well. But Penelope, you should know something else. I am falling in love with you. I did not plan for it to happen, but it has, and I do not want to let you go. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes, a confusing mixture of joy and fear swirling in her chest. I need time, she repeated and fled back to her bedroll before she could say something she was not ready to say. That night, Penelope lay awake, staring at the stars and trying to sort through the chaos of her emotions. She had been so focused on survival for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to want something just for herself. And she did want Quincy. She wanted his steady presence, his quiet strength, his rare smiles that transformed his whole face. She wanted to wake up beside him every morning and fall asleep listening to his breathing every night. But wanting something and being brave enough to reach for it were two different things. The next morning, they were both careful and polite with each other, as if the conversation by the stream had never happened. They traveled through a section of dense forest, following a trail that wound between massive trees hundreds of years old. The horses were skittish, sensing some disturbance in the air, and it took all of their attention to keep the string moving forward. It was mid-afternoon when they heard the sound that made them both freeze, the distinctive rattle of a snake. One of the horses, a young sorrel mare named Daisy, reared up in panic, breaking free from the string. She bolted into the forest, crashing through underbrush. "Stay with the other horses!" Quincy shouted to Penelope, and took off after Daisy before she could respond. Penelope's heart hammered in her chest as she struggled to calm the remaining horses, who were all agitated by Daisy's panic. She heard Quincy's voice in the distance, calling to the mare, trying to soothe her. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, she heard the sound of hooves approaching, and Quincy emerged from the trees leading Daisy, who was trembling but unharmed. "Thank God," Penelope breathed. "Is she all right?" "She is fine, just scared," Quincy said. He was breathing hard, his shirt torn where he had pushed through brambles. "No snake bite that I can see." They made camp early that evening, both of them shaken by the close call. As Penelope prepared dinner, her hands were not quite steady. She kept thinking about what would have happened if the snake had struck Daisy, or worse, if it had struck Quincy. The thought of him being hurt made her feel physically ill. After they ate, she found him checking Daisy one more time, running his hands over her legs to make sure she had not pulled anything in her panicked flight. "Quincy," Penelope said softly. He looked up at her, and in his eyes, she saw the same fear she felt reflected back at her. "I thought about what you said last night," she continued, moving closer. "About coming with you, about being partners. And I think you are right about Tommy. I think I have been using him as an excuse to avoid taking risks, to avoid going after what I really want." "What do you really want?" Quincy asked, straightening to his full height. Penelope took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "You. I want you. I am falling in love with you too, and it terrifies me. But I do not want to let fear rule my life anymore." The smile that spread across Quincy's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides and cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "Say that again," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am falling in love with you," Penelope repeated, her own smile breaking free. Quincy kissed her then, and it was everything Penelope had imagined and more. His lips were soft but firm, and he kissed her with a reverence that made her feel precious, cherished. She wrapped her arms around his neck, rising on her toes to get closer, and felt his arms come around her waist, holding her against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quincy pressed his forehead against hers. "I promise I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you," he said. "You already are," Penelope whispered, and kissed him again. That night, they sat close together by the fire, Penelope tucked against Quincy's side with his arm around her shoulders. They talked about the future, about where they would go and what they would build together. Quincy told her about a piece of land in Montana he had been considering, good grazing land near a river where they could establish a permanent ranch. Penelope talked about wanting to continue her preserves business, maybe even expanding it to sell to hotels and restaurants in the bigger towns. "We could do all of that," Quincy said, squeezing her shoulder. "Together." "I will need to go back to Carson City first," Penelope said, "to settle things with Tommy, to sell the cabin. It is going to be hard, telling him I am leaving for good." "I will be there with you," Quincy promised. "We will face it together." The rest of the journey to Sacramento passed in a blur of happiness. They reached the city on the 14th day, and Quincy set about selling his horses to the buyers who had been expecting him. The transactions took 3 days, and Penelope watched with pride as Quincy negotiated fair prices for each animal, making sure they were going to owners who would treat them well. On the last day, before they sold Dancer, Penelope went to the gray gelding one final time. She stroked his neck and whispered her goodbyes, thanking him for all the years of faithful service. Quincy had found him a buyer who was a school teacher, looking for a gentle horse for her children to learn on, and Penelope knew it was a good placement. "He is going to be happy there," Quincy said, coming to stand beside her. "I know," Penelope said, wiping away a tear. "It is just hard to let go." "Some things we have to let go of so we can hold on to what matters most," Quincy said, taking her hand. Penelope squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from his presence. "You are right. Let us go home." The journey back to Carson City seemed shorter, perhaps because they were no longer strangers feeling their way through uncertain territory. They were partners now, in every sense of the word. They talked and laughed and rode side by side, and at night they would sit close together, planning their future. When Carson City finally came into view, Penelope felt a complicated mix of emotions. This town held so many memories, both good and painful. But she was ready to close this chapter and start a new one. Tommy was waiting at the cabin when they arrived, and Penelope could see immediately that something had changed. Her brother looked healthier, his eyes clear, his posture straighter. He came forward to meet them, his expression anxious. "Penny, I am so glad you are home safe," he said. Then his gaze shifted to Quincy, and his jaw tightened. "Lancaster!" "Tommy," Quincy said evenly. "I need to talk to you, Penny," Tommy said, "alone if possible." Penelope glanced at Quincy, who nodded and stepped back. "I will tend to the horses," he said. Inside the cabin, Penelope sat down across from her brother at the rickety table where they had shared so many meals. Tommy looked nervous, his hands clasped in front of him. "I have been doing a lot of thinking while you were gone," he said, "about what I have put you through, about how I have let you down. Penny, I am so sorry. You have given up so much for me, and all I have done is throw it back in your face." "Tommy," Penelope began, but he held up a hand. "Please let me finish. I went to see Pastor Jim at the church, and I have been talking to him about my drinking problem. I have not touched a drop since you left, and I have been going to meetings with some other men who struggle with the same thing. It has been hard, but I am doing it, and I got a job at the mill. It is not much, but it is honest work, and the foreman says if I keep showing up on time and working hard, he will give me more responsibility." Penelope felt tears spring to her eyes. This was what she had hoped for, prayed for, but never quite believed would happen. "Tommy, that is wonderful. I am so proud of you." "I am not telling you this to make you stay," Tommy said quickly. I know I do not have the right to ask that of you, but I wanted you to know that I am going to be all right. You do not have to worry about me anymore. I will always worry about you, Penelope said, reaching across the table to take his hand. You are my brother, and I love you. But Tommy, you are right. I cannot keep living my life for you. I need to live it for myself. You are leaving with Lancaster, are not you? Tommy said. It was not really a question. Yes, Penelope said. We are going to Montana to start a horse ranch together. But I will write to you, and I will visit when we can. You will always be my family. Tommy nodded, and she could see the effort it took for him to smile. He is a good man, Penny. Even though I hated him for winning Dancer, I could see that. And the way he looks at you, it is like you are the only person in the world. You deserve that kind of love. They embraced, and Penelope let herself cry for the little boy Tommy had been, for the hard road he still had ahead of him, and for the bittersweet nature of letting go. When she finally pulled back, Tommy was crying too. Make me a promise, he said. Promise me you will be happy. Promise me you will grab onto that happiness with both hands and never let it go. I promise, Penelope said. Over the next week, Penelope prepared for her departure. She sold the cabin to a young couple who were just starting out, and she took comfort in knowing that the home her father built would shelter another family. She gave most of the furniture to Tommy, along with enough money from her savings to help him get started in his new life. She packed only what she could carry: her clothes, her mother's jewelry, her father's pocket watch, and the quilt she had made. Quincy used the money from selling his horses to buy supplies for their journey north and to purchase 2 sturdy draft horses that would serve them well on the ranch. He also bought Penelope a beautiful wedding ring, a simple gold band engraved with tiny flowers. I know we have not had a formal ceremony yet, he said when he slipped it onto her finger. But I wanted you to have this. When we get to Montana, we will find a preacher and do it right. But Penelope, in my heart, you are already my wife. And you are already my husband, Penelope said, admiring the way the ring caught the light. In every way that matters. They were married by Pastor Jim in a simple ceremony at the church, with Tommy and a few townsfolk as witnesses. Penelope wore her mother's blue calico dress, and Quincy wore a new shirt and vest he had bought for the occasion. The ceremony was brief, but the vows they spoke were heartfelt and true. When Quincy kissed her as his wife, Penelope felt as if her entire life had been leading to this moment. The reception was held in the church hall, and though it was humble, with simple food and no music, it was filled with warmth and genuine happiness. Tommy gave a short speech, his voice breaking, as he wished his sister joy and thanked Quincy for making her happy. By the end of the evening, even Quincy had tears in his eyes. The next morning, Penelope and Quincy set out for Montana. The journey would take weeks, crossing through harsh terrain and unpredictable weather, but Penelope was not afraid. She had Quincy by her side, and together they could face anything. They traveled north through Nevada and into Idaho, following trails that Quincy knew from his years of wandering. The landscape changed from desert to grassland to forest, each new vista more beautiful than the last. They made camp under the stars, cooked their meals over open fires, and fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms. It was a hard life, but it was also incredibly freeing. Penelope had never felt so alive. They reached Montana in late November, just as the first snows began to fall. Quincy led them to the land he had spoken of, a beautiful stretch of valley nestled between mountains, with a river running through it and good timber for building. They spent their first night in a tent, planning where they would build their house, where they would put the corrals, where they would plant a garden come spring. "Are you sure about this?" Quincy asked as they lay together, watching the stars through the open tent flap. "It is going to be a lot of hard work, and winters here are brutal." "I am sure," Penelope said, snuggling closer to him. "As long as I am with you, I can handle anything." They built a small cabin before the deep snows came, working from dawn to dusk to get a roof over their heads. It was rough and simple, just one room with a fireplace and a loft for sleeping, but it was theirs. Penelope made curtains from flour sacks and braided rugs from scraps of fabric. Quincy built furniture, a table and chairs, a bed frame, shelves for their supplies. Slowly, the cabin became a home. The winter was indeed harsh, with snowdrifts that sometimes reached the windows and temperatures that plunged well below zero. But inside the cabin, Penelope and Quincy were warm and content. They spent the long evenings talking, reading aloud from the few books they owned, and making love in the big bed Quincy had built. Penelope learned that her husband was passionate and tender, always making sure she felt cherished and desired. In the spring, they began building the ranch in earnest. Quincy used his contacts to purchase a small herd of horses, including 3 mares and a stallion with excellent bloodlines. Penelope started a garden, planting vegetables and herbs, and she began experimenting with new preserve recipes using wild berries she foraged from the surrounding forest. They worked side by side, equal partners in every sense, and their love deepened with each passing day. In July, Penelope realized she was pregnant. She told Quincy one evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains. He was so overcome with joy that he could not speak for a long moment, and when he finally found his voice, it was thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby?" he asked, as if he could not quite believe it. "Yes," Penelope said, laughing at his stunned expression. "In February, if my calculations are correct." Quincy pulled her into his arms and held her close, and Penelope felt his tears wet her hair. "I never thought I would have this," he said. "A wife, a home, a child. I thought I was meant to wander alone forever." "You are not alone anymore," Penelope said fiercely. "You have me, and you have this baby, and we are going to build a beautiful life together." The pregnancy was not easy. Penelope was sick for the first 3 months, and as winter approached again, she found the cold and isolation difficult to bear. But Quincy was attentive and patient, doing everything he could to make her comfortable. He rubbed her aching back, fixed her whatever foods she could stomach, and read to her for hours when she was too tired to do anything else. In February of 1872, on a snowy night with the wind howling around the cabin, Penelope gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, attended only by Quincy and a Shoshone woman named Bright Moon, who lived with her family a few miles away and had experience as a midwife. When Penelope finally held her baby boy in her arms, she wept with a joy so profound it seemed to fill the entire world. "What should we name him?" Quincy asked, his voice full of wonder as he looked at his son. "James," Penelope said, thinking of her father. "James Lancaster." "James," Quincy repeated and smiled. "It is perfect." Raising a baby on an isolated ranch was challenging, but Penelope and Quincy rose to meet every obstacle. They took turns staying up with James when he cried in the night, and they celebrated every milestone, from his first smile to his first words to his first wobbly steps. The ranch prospered as well, gaining a reputation for producing quality horses, and buyers came from as far away as California to purchase from Quincy Lancaster. Penelope's preserve business also grew. She sold her goods to the general store in the nearest town and to passing travelers who stopped at the ranch. Her recipes became so popular that she eventually published them in a small cookbook, which sold well enough to provide a steady additional income. 3 years after James was born, Penelope gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after the chestnut mare that had started everything. Rose was a firecracker from the beginning, loud and demanding and utterly fearless. She was walking by 10 months and getting into mischief by the time she was a year old. James adored his little sister, and the two of them became inseparable. The years passed in a blur of hard work, laughter, and love. Penelope and Quincy's partnership only strengthened with time, each learning to anticipate the other's needs and thoughts. They had their disagreements, of course, but they always worked through them with honesty and respect. Tommy wrote regularly from Carson City, and his letters were full of good news. He had married a widow with 2 young children, and he had been promoted to foreman at the mill. He had stayed sober for years now and was active in the church. He visited Montana twice and both times Penelope was moved to see how much he had changed. He was a man now, responsible and steady, and she was proud of him. When James was 8 and Rose was 5, Penelope gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Henry and Grace. The cabin was bursting at the seams by then, so Quincy built an addition, giving them 3 bedrooms and a separate kitchen. The ranch now covered several hundred acres, and they employed 2 ranch hands to help with the work. On a warm evening in June of 1883, Penelope and Quincy sat on their porch, watching their 4 children play in the yard. James was teaching Rose how to throw a rope while the twins toddled around, chasing a friendly ranch dog. The mountains rose majestically in the distance, painted gold by the setting sun. "Do you ever think about that night in Carson City?" Quincy asked, taking Penelope's hand. "When your brother gambled away your horse?" "Sometimes," Penelope said. "If Tommy had not made that mistake, I never would have met you. So as much as it hurt at the time, I think it was meant to happen." "I thank God for it every day," Quincy said. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture that never failed to make her heart flutter. "You gave me everything I never knew I needed." "We gave it to each other," Penelope corrected. She looked at her husband, at the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, at the lines that years of laughter and sun had etched into his face. He was still the handsomest man she had ever seen. "I love you, Penelope Lancaster," Quincy said. "I love you too," Penelope replied. "Always and forever." As the sun set and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had lost her father and nearly lost everything else. She had been forced to rely on the charity of a stranger, had been given a chance when she least expected it. That stranger had become her partner, her lover, her husband, the father of her children, and the love of her life. The ranch thrived over the following years, becoming one of the most respected horse breeding operations in Montana. Quincy's reputation for producing quality animals and treating them with kindness spread far and wide. Penelope's preserves were sold in stores throughout the territory, and her cookbook went into multiple printings. But more than their professional success, they were proud of the family they had built together. James grew into a tall, quiet young man, with his father's way with horses and his mother's steady temperament. He took over more and more of the ranch operations as Quincy's back began to give him trouble in his later years. Rose was as wild and free-spirited as her name suggested, riding as well as any man and refusing to be confined by society's expectations of young women. Henry and Grace, the twins, were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and seeming to communicate without words. When James was 22, he married a teacher from town, a kind young woman named Elizabeth, who loved the ranch as much as he did. They built a house on the property, not far from the main cabin, and the family continued to grow. Rose eventually married a surveyor who appreciated her independence and spirit, and they settled in Helena, where Rose opened a successful dry goods store. The twins, Henry and Grace, both went to college in the East, Henry to study veterinary medicine, and Grace to become a teacher. As Penelope and Quincy grew older, they spent more time sitting on their porch, watching the world go by. They told stories to their grandchildren about the old days, about how they had met and fallen in love, about the hard work and determination that had built the ranch from nothing. On a crisp autumn day in 1901, Quincy died peacefully in his sleep, Penelope holding his hand. He was 63 years old, and they had been married for nearly 30 years. Penelope grieved deeply, feeling as if a part of her soul had been torn away. But she found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together, and in the memories of 3 decades of profound love. She lived for another 12 years, dying quietly in the spring of 1913 at the age of 74. Her last words were, "I am coming, Quincy," and those who were there swore she smiled, as if she could see something beautiful that they could not. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management and eventually passed to his children. The Lancaster name became synonymous with quality horses throughout the West, and the brand Quincy had designed, a simple cue inside a circle, was recognized and respected wherever horses were bought and sold. In the town cemetery, two headstones stood side by side. One read, Quincy Lancaster, 1838, 1901, beloved husband, father and friend. The other, Penelope Lancaster, 1838, 1913, beloved wife, mother, and friend. Between them, someone had planted roses, which bloomed every summer in brilliant reds and pinks, a living testament to a love that had conquered hardship and transformed two lonely souls into one unbreakable whole. The story of Penelope and Quincy became family legend, told and retold through the generations. It was a story of loss and redemption, of taking chances and believing in second opportunities. It was a story of how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best things if we are brave enough to see the possibilities rather than just the problems. Years later, when Penelope and Quincy's great grandchildren gathered for family reunions at the ranch, they would stand before those twin headstones and marvel at the journey that had begun with a gambling debt and a gift of kindness. They would look at the thriving ranch around them, at the horses grazing in fields that stretched to the horizon, at the solid house that had been expanded and modernized but still contained that original one-room cabin at its core, and they would understand that they owed their very existence to a cowboy who had given a desperate woman one of his best mares. The chestnut mare named Rosie, who had been loaned out for that fateful market day so long ago, had lived to the ripe old age of 28, dying peacefully in the very barn Quincy built with his own hands. Her descendants still carried her bloodline, strong and steady and gentle, just as she had been. In a way, Rosie had been the beginning of everything, the bridge between two lonely people who had needed each other more than they knew. The Wild West that Penelope and Quincy had known, that rough frontier where fortunes could be lost in a card game and lives could change in a heartbeat, had gradually transformed into something more settled and civilized. But the values they had lived by, honesty and hard work, and treating all living things with kindness, remained as relevant as ever. Their story was not unique in the broad sweep of history. Thousands of couples met, fell in love, and built lives together in those wild frontier days. But to their descendants, to the family that grew from that chance meeting in Carson City, Nevada, in 1871, it was the most important story in the world. It was the foundation upon which everything else was built. And so, the tale lived on, passed down through the generations, a reminder that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, that redemption is always possible, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as losses. All it takes is the courage to accept help when it is offered, the wisdom to recognize opportunity when it appears, and the faith to believe that even in the hardest moments, something beautiful might be waiting just around the corner. In the end, Penelope and Quincy's story was not about a horse, though that is where it started. It was about two people who found in each other exactly what they needed: a partner, a friend, a lover, and a companion for the journey. It was about building something lasting from nothing but determination and love. It was about the choices we make in our darkest hours and how those choices can lead us, if we are fortunate and brave, into the light. Their legacy lived on not just in the ranch they built or the children they raised, but in the example they set for living a life of integrity, compassion, and devotion. Every foal born on the Lancaster Ranch carried forward the careful breeding program Quincy had started. Every jar of preserves made using Penelope's recipes honored her memory. And every time a family member made a choice to be kind rather than cruel, to work hard rather than take the easy path, to love deeply rather than guard their heart, they were continuing the tradition that Penelope and Quincy had established so many years before. The mountains still stood watch over the valley, unchanging and eternal. The river still flowed, cold and clear, through the heart of the ranch. The seasons still cycled through their endless dance, spring giving way to summer, autumn surrendering to winter, and always the promise of renewal when the snow melted and the grass turned green again. The land endured, and so did the love story that had unfolded upon it, a testament to the power of human connection and the resilience of the human heart. And though Penelope and Quincy were long gone, returned to the earth they had worked and loved, their spirits lingered in every corner of the ranch. They were there in the whinny of a mare calling to her foal, in the scent of preserves simmering on the stove, in the laughter of children playing in the yard, and in the quiet moments when two people sat side by side on a porch, watching the sun set over the mountains and counting themselves blessed to have found each other in this vast and often lonely world.